My fiancé's business trip was a lie, and I followed him to find out the truth. Hey Reddit, I'm Emily, 27F, and today, I'm here with a story that's going to sound like something out of a movie. It's about my fiancé, Derek, who's 30M. We've been together for 5 years and engaged for just over 1 year. We'd been planning our wedding with so much excitement, or at least, that's what I thought. But in the last few months, Derek's behavior had started to change in subtle ways, and when he claimed he had to go on a last-minute business trip, my gut was telling me something was very, very wrong. It all started a few months ago when Derek became incredibly distant. We used to spend hours talking about our day, sharing stories, and discussing wedding plans, but lately, he'd just nod along, barely responding. Whenever I'd ask about work, he'd brush me off with a quick, "It's nothing," or "just the usual." At first, I chalked it up to stress. His job in finance is intense, and he's had big projects come up before. But one evening, while we were having dinner, he got a message that seemed to change his whole demeanor. I watched him glance at his phone, and in an instant, he looked almost guilty. He shoved the phone in his pocket and said he had to take care of something, excusing himself from the table. When he returned, he looked pale and tense, and wouldn't make eye contact. That night, I lay awake, wondering what could possibly have been on that message. I debated whether I was overreacting or if there was something real behind my unease. A few weeks later, Derek mentioned he had a business trip coming up, something he hadn't done in months. But here's the thing, Derek is usually meticulous about his travel plans, telling me every detail so I wouldn't worry. This time, he barely gave any information, just that he'd be gone for a few days to sort things out with a client. I tried to ask more about it, but he shut down each question with a vague answer. It felt like he was hiding something, and I decided to find out what. The night before he left, he packed his bags, seeming a little too eager to go. I noted down the hotel he'd mentioned and the flight he claimed he'd be on, but my mind was racing with doubt. The next morning, I dropped him off at the airport, watching him walk through security. As soon as I was back in the car, I pulled out my phone and checked the flight details online. Sure enough, there was a flight with his airline, but something was off. He wasn't on the passenger list. I was stunned, but I knew I needed to keep digging. So, I called in sick to work the next day, booked a last-minute ticket on the next flight to the same city, and decided to follow him. When I landed, I went straight to the hotel Derek was supposedly staying at. I walked up to the front desk, asking for his room number, but the receptionist shook her head and said there was no record of a Derek staying there. That's when reality hit me like a punch to the gut. He wasn't staying at the hotel he'd mentioned. My fiancé, the man I was planning to spend my life with, had blatantly lied about where he'd be. I walked out of the hotel feeling hollow and disoriented. I didn't know what to do next, so I sat in a nearby cafe, nursing a coffee, and considered my options. Just as I was about to give up and fly back home, I got a notification on my phone. It was from one of Derek's friends on social media, sharing a story from a different, upscale hotel across town. And there, in the background, was Derek. He was dressed casually, sitting with a woman I'd never seen before, laughing and looking far too comfortable. My stomach twisted. I didn't recognize the woman, but they looked close. Too close for comfort. Fueled by a mix of rage and heartbreak, I made my way to that hotel, hoping I'd catch him in the act and finally get some answers. When I arrived, I lingered in the lobby, keeping my eyes peeled for any sign of Derek or his mystery companion. Hours went by, and I started to wonder if I'd missed them, until I saw them. They were coming down the elevator together, talking closely, almost whispering. The way they looked at each other was intimate, affectionate. My heart sank as I watched them walk through the lobby, hand in hand, laughing. That laugh that used to be meant for me, for our inside jokes, our memories. I felt a wave of betrayal and anger unlike anything I'd ever felt before. My initial impulse was to confront them, but something in me held back. Instead, I snapped a few photos with my phone, documenting everything. My mind was racing, but I forced myself to stay calm and follow them at a distance as they left the hotel and went out for lunch. Watching them so close was torture, but I knew I needed proof. It felt surreal, like I was watching a twisted version of the life we'd built, shattering before my eyes. I returned home the next day with a heavy heart and a phone full of evidence. Derek got back from his business trip a couple of days later, walking in with that same fake grin, pretending everything was normal. I knew I couldn't play along, So I waited until he was settled and told him I'd found out the truth. I laid it all out, the photos, the hotel, the lies. His face went pale, and for a moment, I saw a flash of panic in his eyes before he composed himself. At first, he tried to deny it, saying it was just a friend from work and that I was overreacting. But as I revealed more details, he crumbled, admitting it had been going on for months. He said he felt trapped in our relationship and was confused about what he wanted. I couldn't believe the audacity. We were engaged, planning our lives together, and he was telling me he felt trapped? In a strange twist of fate, Derek's company went under shortly after. The business trip he had lied about was actually a final meeting with his lover, discussing plans to move in together now that he'd planned to leave me. The fallout from the company collapse meant he had no job and, consequently, no income to support his new life. Instead of a dramatic breakup, I stayed calm, telling him I'd need time to think. Behind the scenes, though, I contacted a lawyer and prepared my exit plan. I made sure to protect my assets, pulling everything I could from our joint accounts. I moved out quietly, leaving him with a final note: "You wanted a new life? Enjoy it." In a twist he wasn't expecting, I'd also let our entire friend group know exactly what he'd done, sharing the photos and details. The support I received from our mutual friends was overwhelming. Most of them cut ties with Derek, and I found myself surrounded by people who had my back. Months passed, and I started to heal, diving into my career and slowly piecing my life back together. One evening, out of the blue, I got a message from Derek. He told me he'd made a mistake and missed the life we'd planned together. He was apologetic, saying he felt lost without me. But by then, I was done. I'd seen the truth, and there was no going back. To everyone here, remember, trust your instincts, even when it's painful. That so-called business trip turned my world upside down, but it also freed me from a future with a man who couldn't be honest. I may not have closure in the way I'd wanted, but I have my peace, and that's worth more than anything he could have ever given me.